Masks Murder, which is the 10th book in the Auntie Clem's Bakery series. That's the series that starts with gluten-free murder. And just to let you know, you can get the collections of books 1 to 3, 4 to 6, and 7 to 9, each for 99 cents at the Kindle store. That deal ends today. So if you want to pick up all of the previous books in the series, you can do that now, but don't wait till tomorrow because they'll go back to the regular price. And also, there are some other new releases that I've mentioned in my blog post today. I'll put a link to that in the comments section. And of course, a buy link for Muffins Masks Murder if you didn't already have that on pre order. So, as usual, I'm going to do a reading for you today. I'm actually going to do part of chapter 1 and chapter 3. So, there will be a skip in the middle here, but I think it will be more exciting for you if I jump ahead to chapter 3. Okay. Ah, finally. Vic took a long breath of air as they stepped off the plane. I can get warm again. Erin laughed and shook her head at her young blonde assistant. Vic had not been able to get properly warm since crossing the border into Canada. Even though she had bundled up on their Alaskan cruise, she just had not been able to get comfortable. It hadn't been so bad for Erin. Her body was more acclimatized to Maine weather than to Tennessee, so she had fared better. But she had to admit that she still preferred being warm to cold. And while the cruise had been intended to be a nice diversion from her life in Bald Eagle Falls, things had not gone exactly as planned. A relaxed, carefree vacation it had not been. There's no place like home, Erin declared. There surely isn't, Vic agreed, drawing out the words in her longest southern drawl. We'll need a vacation from our vacation, Officer Terry Piper said, as the men followed the women off the plane through the corridor to the terminal. You're not kidding about that, Vic agreed. Erin glanced back at Willie, who was characteristically quiet, to see how he felt about it. His skin, darkly stained from the mining and metal processing he did, was disconcerting to someone just meeting him for the first time, but Erin was so used to it that she hardly even noticed it anymore. A far cry from when she'd first arrived in Bald Eagle Falls, and had taken him for a dirty, homeless man, and had been afraid to let him help her carry supplies into Erin's new, gluten-free and specialty bakery, Auntie Clem's. Now Erin wouldn't have given it a second thought. Willie was one of the family. He might be non-traditional, picking up whatever odd jobs he felt like between working his mineral claims, but she knew he was a hard worker, not the layabout that many people seem to think. He'd been in Bald Eagle Falls much longer than she had, and the townspeople should have known better. There was still prejudice against people who didn't conform, and Willie was about as non-conforming as they came. Willie smiled and nodded at Erin, acknowledging her look, but didn't have anything to contribute to the conversation. He moved forward and put his arm around Vic, who also faced prejudice for her gender identity. He bumped against the cast on her arm. Just about time to get these off, Miss Victoria. He indicated the cast on his leg as well. It will feel good to be able to get the darn thing out of the way. And to scratch, Vic said fervently. If there's one thing I want more than to be warm right now, it's to be able to scratch this arm like a dog at a flea circus. She scratched around the end of the cast, sliding her fingers under the edge as far as she could reach. Terry didn't take Erin's arm, but was trying to keep Canine under control. Canine wasn't usually on a leash, but was well trained to heel, and other than when he'd first met the stray orange kitten who'd wandered into Auntie Clem's bakery, Erin had rarely seen him out of Terry's control. But he clearly knew that they were going home. He was sniffing the air and dragging Terry along, eager to get out of the airport terminal and back to familiar settings. Heel, Terry commanded in a low, firm voice. Come on, buddy. Let's show some professionalism here. It took a few tries before Canine was finally at his side, behaving as was expected from a veteran police dog, but his nose still quivered and his ears pointed forward. Do you think he's looking forward to getting back to work? Erin asked. Animals like routines. He's not used to being cooped up on a ship. Even though I walked him plenty, it's not the same as patrolling all day, and I'm sure he felt it worse than I did. I'm going to have to work off a few extra pounds here. He patted his sleek belly. Erin couldn't tell that he'd put on any weight, but she knew it was bothering him. Who knew you could gain weight eating vegan food? She laughed. I was sure we'd all be thin as rails by the time we got back. Unfortunately, no such luck. She was so short, every pound she put on looked like two. Her frame was not nearly as forgiving as Vic's tall, slender physique. But I can't tell you've gained anything, and after you've been hitting the streets of Bald Eagle Falls again, it will just melt away. I hope so. I have no intention of turning into one of those cops with the big beer gut hanging over his belt. I don't think you need to worry about that. Erin couldn't help admiring her officer handsome. He had boyish good looks, cut a very dashing figure in his police uniform, and when she made him smile, had the cutest dimple in his cheek. He was intelligent and kind, and it was a wonder he hadn't been scooped up by some other woman long before Erin had shown up on the scene. But he was married to his work, and maybe no other woman wanted to compete with that devotion, and the long hours of days and nights that he was gone. In a little town like Bald Eagle Falls, with its minuscule police force, he was frequently the go-to man, even when he wasn't supposed to be on call. It was another hour before they finally got all of their baggage off the carousel and were on their way. They retrieved Willie's truck from long-term parking and piled everything into the back before climbing up into the seats. Are you glad to be home? Vic asked Erin, looking back over the seat of the cab to where Erin and Terry sat in the second row of seating. I'll be glad when I am home, Erin agreed. She might be back in Tennessee, but she wasn't in her house yet, and that was what she wanted. Just to be home and away from all of the drama and excitement that had surrounded their cruise, back in her familiar environment with her list of things to do and her baker's schedule and something to keep her busy. The idea of a cruise had been nice, and Terry had thought that it would help Erin to be away from the stressful day-to-day business of running a bakery, but it had been more difficult not to have something to keep her hands and mind busy. So she didn't have to think about finding the body of Mr. Inglethorpe or the other traumatic events that had preceded the cruise. Erin had to admit that she wasn't a fun person. She wasn't interested in going out to a restaurant or dancing or watching a lounge act or going on a tour. She was happier following her set routine. You'll be happy to get back to your house, the bakery, and your animals, Terry agreed. All right, skipping ahead to chapter 3. They were finishing up when there was a knock on the front door, and Erin heard a familiar young male voice calling out, "Where's that sister of mine? A little bird said you were back in town." Vic hurried out of the kitchen. "Jeremy!" "There she is." Erin looked through the doorway to see Vic and Jeremy hugging and slapping one another on the back. "So how was the trip?" Jeremy demanded. "Doesn't look like you wasted away to nothing or fell off the ship." Vic threw an apologetic glance in Erin's direction. She drew back from Jeremy, smiling. "No, there was way too much food there to lose anything. In fact, I may have found a few." Jeremy laughed. "Good. You put the rest of us to shame. It wouldn't hurt you to find a few pounds." Vic rolled her eyes, smiling at being able to see her brother again. "And you survived while I was gone, without your little sister to take care of you?" "Well, it was tough, but I had—" Jeremy stopped abruptly and looked around for his girlfriend. Beaver was standing just outside the door, looking back at the street. Jeremy and Vic waited for her to come in. Erin stepped into the living room, wondering what was going on. Hey, Ro?" Jeremy called tentatively. Beaver didn't turn toward the house or enter. She stood there, just in front of the door, looking intently over her shoulder. They all stood there for a moment, frozen, wondering what was going on. Eventually, Beaver turned around and saw everyone looking at her. Her body relaxed into a loose, casual pose. She smiled widely, chewing on her ever-present gum. "Everyone waiting for me? You don't have to do that." "What's going on?" Jeremy asked. "I thought you were right behind me, and then you—" Beaver looked back over her shoulder one more time and shrugged it as if it was nothing. Her eyes sought out Terry, back in the kitchen behind Erin. She didn't say anything to him, but it was apparent from her expression that she wanted a word. "What's up?" Terry asked. She shrugged lazily, maintaining a casual and relaxed body language. "Nothing important, Officer Piper. How was your vacation?" "You probably know more about it than anyone else around here, maybe even more than me, since no one wanted to talk to me in any official capacity. Things didn't go exactly as planned." Beaver chewed her gum, chuckling. "I would say that was an understatement. Can't you people even stay out of trouble on a holiday cruise?" "We didn't really have any control over the circumstances." Terry looked over at Erin, gauging her reaction to the conversation. He smiled at her reassuringly and didn't bring her involvement into it. Things just fell into our laps, and I was the only police officer aboard, so they did have their own security forces. I assume you could have left it to them. You wouldn't say that if you'd been there. No, I probably wouldn't, Beaver agreed with a sage nod. Why don't you tell me all about it while you take Canine out for a walk? Terry's eyes went to Canine, who was completely relaxed, stretched out on the floor in his favorite spot where everyone would trip over him as they cleaned up. I don't think Canine, he started, then he stopped. He snapped his fingers for Canine, who looked up alertly. At Terry's signal, he got to his feet and went to his side. Beaver nodded. Won't be long, Erin, Terry said. I'll take Canine for a short walk, and then I need to be getting into work. You'll be heading to bed pretty soon? Early to bed and early to rise, Erin agreed. She watched Terry and Beaver, wondering what it was that Beaver really wanted to talk to Terry about. It was clear that she didn't want to talk about it in front of everyone else. And Rohilda Beavan, with her three initial federal employer, had every reason to contact the local law enforcement if something were going on. She and Terry and Canine headed for the door. Erin looked at Jeremy. Is something going on? Nothing I'm aware of. She didn't say that she needed to talk to Terry about anything and was looking forward to a little something to eat. He looked at the food that was still out in the kitchen. She shouldn't be too long, so could we leave this out a bit longer? If she's not back by the time you want to head to bed, I'll get everything cleaned up. Yes, of course. Let me just put the buns in a bag so they don't dry out. Rice flour makes them dry out faster than wheat buns. Jeremy nodded distractedly. He looked in the direction that Terry and Beaver were walking, their heads bowed as they talked. Everything was quiet while we were gone? Vic prodded. Sure, everything's been perfectly normal. Ro hasn't said anything else was bothering her. And I've just been working. Everything's been quiet on the farm. No more ginseng poachers? No, and it's getting late in the season for them now. They won't have much need for security in the winter months. Can't poachers harvest any time of year? Erin asked, frowning. Sure, but they can't find much of a market for it. The government only allows legal harvesting until the end of December. They won't be able to sell it as legitimately harvested after that, and the margins on the black market ginseng are pretty brutal. Oh, Erin shrugged her shoulders and shook her head. You learn something new every day. At least you got your harvest in good time. Erin nodded. The surprise wild ginseng harvest had been a windfall for her. She was still getting used to the idea that she had money, real money. She'd always been on the edge of poverty before and had been struggling with running Auntie Clem's bakery after the fire and rebuilding. She didn't want her friends to know just how near she'd come to closing down. All right, I am going to stop there and check out the buy link. You can purchase Muffins Masks Murder for yourself and find out what happens next. Happy Friday, and hope you find some good books to read on my blog post. Talk to you next week.